If you had asked me a year ago, I would have told you my life was fine. Not exciting, not miserable, just fine. I had a decent career, an apartment with more space than I needed, and a routine that never changed. Wake up, work, eat alone, sleep. Repeat. Funny how you can get so used to feeling nothing that you forget what it's like to feel anything at all. That was me, numb, content in a way that didn't hurt but didn't heal either. I wasn't looking for change. In fact, I was actively avoiding it. And then she happened. It was a random Saturday, one of those days where you have no plans but pretend you're busy. I ended up wandering into a local art exhibition. I'm not an art guy. I don't understand half of what's on those walls. But it was quiet, and quiet was good. That's when I saw her. Or maybe it's better to say she saw me. Standing next to this massive, messy painting that looked like chaos had exploded on a canvas, she smiled at me like we were old friends. "You don't like it, do you?" she asked, catching me off guard. I mumbled something about colors being too loud. She laughed, not a polite chuckle, the kind of laugh that makes you feel like you said something clever even when you didn't. And just like that, we started talking. She was 22, I was 45, twice her age. The number kept ringing in my head like an alarm. But she didn't seem to care. She spoke with this strange mix of youthful energy and old soul wisdom. She didn't just talk about art. She talked about life, fear, regret, things most people my age avoid. Every sentence from her was like holding up a mirror I didn't want to look into. Yet, I couldn't look away. We must have stood there for an hour, talking about nothing and everything. It wasn't flirting, not at first. It was curiosity. She was curious about my world, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I wanted to be a part of hers. But as the crowd thinned out and reality crept back in, I told myself this was a one-time thing. A nice conversation with a smart, young woman. Nothing more. I thanked her, made some excuse about work, and left. But that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her words kept replaying in my mind. "Why do adults get so scared of wanting more?" she had asked. At the time, I brushed it off. Now, it echoed louder than I'd like to admit. I told myself it was just a random meeting. A harmless chat. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. Something I couldn't name yet. All I knew was, for the first time in years, I felt alive. And that scared me more than anything else. The next weekend, without really planning to, I found myself back at that same art gallery. I told myself it was just for the peace and quiet, but we both know that wasn't true. I walked slowly, pretending to admire the paintings, but my eyes kept searching for her. And there she was, right where I hoped she'd be, adding tiny strokes to a canvas with a focus that made the world disappear. She caught me looking, smirked, and said, twice in a row, "Either you're becoming an art lover, or you're just bad at excuses." I laughed, a little embarrassed, but I didn't deny it. We fell into conversation again, so easily it was like we'd known each other for years. She had this way of asking questions that made simple answers feel too shallow. "What makes you happy?" she asked, tilting her head, genuinely curious. I didn't know how to answer that. When was the last time anyone even asked me that? I gave a safe response, something about reading in quiet evenings, but she didn't buy it. She just smiled, as if she knew I was lying to myself. Every time we spoke, she pulled me a little further out of my shell, and without meaning to, I started looking forward to seeing her. We'd sit in the small cafe next to the gallery, talking about things I never talked about, dreams I had forgotten, regrets I had buried. She listened without judgment, without rushing to fill the silence. And that was new for me. She was young, but she didn't fill her sentences with meaningless noise like so many others. Her words were sharp, honest, sometimes too honest. And every time she spoke, it felt like she was peeling away the layers I had built to protect myself from feeling too much. But the voice in my head kept whispering, reminding me of the obvious. She was young, too young. What could she possibly want with a man my age? Surely this was just entertainment for her, a game. I kept trying to convince myself of that. I even tried pulling away, skipping a visit, making excuses. But the absence of those conversations hit harder than I expected. I missed her questions, her way of making me uncomfortable in the best possible way. And when I finally went back, she just looked at me, smiled, and said, "Had enough of hiding yet?" No anger, no guilt-tripping, just a quiet confidence that made me feel seen. That's when I realized it wasn't about age for her. It was about connection, something I had been starved of without even knowing it. The more I tried to fight it, the stronger it pulled me in. I wasn't under her spell because of her looks or her youth. It was her mind, her fearless way of living, that had me hooked. And no matter how much my pride resisted, my heart was already giving in. Days turned into weeks, and somehow, without either of us planning it, she had become a part of my routine. Only this time, the routine didn't feel suffocating. She invited me to her art studio one afternoon, saying she wanted to show me her chaos. I expected a neat little space with a few canvases and brushes, but when I stepped in, it was like walking into another world. Paint splatters on the walls, unfinished pieces leaning against each other, colors everywhere. It was messy, wild, alive. The opposite of my carefully organized, lifeless apartment. She moved around the studio like she belonged to it, barefoot, hair tied up in the laziest bun, humming to herself as if she had no idea what she was doing to my chest. Watching her, I felt a strange mix of admiration and envy. She was so free, so unapologetically herself. At some point, she noticed my silence and said, "You don't like the mess, do you?" I told her it wasn't the mess that bothered me, it was realizing how much of my life I'd spent avoiding this kind of chaos, fearing it would swallow me whole. She looked at me for a long moment, then asked, "Or maybe you're just scared it would make you feel too much." That hit harder than I expected. She had a way of cutting through all my carefully built defenses with just a few words. I didn't answer her question. I couldn't. Instead, I watched her paint, each stroke of her brush bold and deliberate, as if she was rewriting the rules of her own little universe. The tension between us had changed. It was no longer just curiosity or friendship. There was something else now. Something neither of us wanted to say out loud. But it was there, in the way her fingers brushed mine when she handed me a cup of coffee, in the way her gaze lingered a second longer than it should. I could feel my heart betraying me, beating faster every time she came close. Yet, the age gap kept screaming in my head. Every moment with her was a battle between what I felt and what I believed was right. I wasn't supposed to fall for someone her age. I was supposed to know better. But knowing better doesn't stop you from wanting. I tried to convince myself this was just admiration, a harmless connection. But the more I tried to rationalize it, the more obvious it became, I was lying. Not to her, to myself. She never once tried to cross the line, never once made a move. And yet, with every conversation, every glance, I found myself drifting closer to an edge I wasn't sure I wanted to avoid. That day, as I left her studio, she said something that stayed with me. "You're so afraid of being a cliché, you're missing out on being real." I didn't know how to respond, so I just smiled and walked away. But inside, I knew. I was already falling, and there was no stopping it now. It happened on an ordinary evening, no big event, no dramatic setup. We were sitting in that small cafe next to the gallery, the same place where so many of our conversations had unfolded. But this time, something was different. She was quieter, thoughtful, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. I could feel the air between us shift, like we both knew what was coming but were too afraid to name it. Then, out of nowhere, she looked up and said, "You know how you keep fighting this? Us. I see it every time you look at me, every time you pull back. And it's okay, but I just want you to know, I'm not a child playing games. I know exactly what I'm doing." Her voice was calm, steady, but there was something vulnerable underneath it. I felt my throat tighten. She wasn't calling me out to embarrass me. She was offering me a choice. I told her the truth, that I was terrified. Not of her, but of what people would say, of what it meant to want something I wasn't supposed to want. That I was scared of being judged, of becoming a sad old man clinging to his youth through someone else. She listened without interrupting, her eyes never leaving mine. And when I finished rambling, she simply said, "I don't need you to be younger. I need you to be honest." That simple sentence hit me harder than any argument ever could. She wasn't asking me to chase after lost years. She was asking me to show up as I am. Flawed, scared, but real. After that, something shifted between us. We didn't declare anything, didn't suddenly become a couple. But our time together changed. We walked more, talked less, shared silences that felt heavier than words. She'd lean into me during late-night strolls, not out of need, but out of comfort. And I stopped pulling away. The outside world, though, wasn't so kind. Whispers started. Friends, colleagues, even strangers had opinions. I could see the sideways glances, hear the subtle jokes. My ex-wife's voice was the loudest in my head, mocking, bitter, reminding me of every mistake I'd made. Every insecurity I had bubbled to the surface. I questioned myself daily. Was this real, or was I just fooling myself, caught in a fantasy? But every time those doubts crept in, I'd remember her words, I don't need you to be younger. I need you to be honest. With her, I wasn't pretending. I wasn't trying to be anyone else. And that scared me more than anything, because it was rare. It was real. I began to realize that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't the world's judgment I feared most. It was my own. She wasn't the one trapping me in this struggle. I was. And slowly, quietly, I started letting go of that fear. Not completely, not instantly. But enough to stop running. Enough to start being present when she laughed at my dry jokes or challenged my cynical views. Enough to admit, at least to myself, that I was under her spell. Not because of her age, but because she made me feel seen. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't want to hide anymore. It was bound to happen, I guess. The moment when our quiet little world collided with the noise outside. One afternoon, while grabbing coffee, we bumped into an old friend of mine. The way his eyes darted between us, the forced smile, the unspoken judgment, it was all there. Later that evening, I got the message. Midlife crisis hitting hard, huh? Simple words, meant as a joke, but they landed like a punch. I didn't tell her about it, but she could sense the shift. I became quieter, more distant. Old insecurities came flooding back. Was I embarrassing myself? Was I setting her up for disappointment? The whispers turned into louder echoes, from colleagues, from family, even from strangers who thought their opinions mattered. Every time we walked together, I could feel the weight of their stares. And yet, she never flinched. She never let go of my hand, never acted ashamed. That quiet confidence of hers, it was both comforting and intimidating. One night, after a particularly cruel comment from an old acquaintance, I broke. I told her everything. The doubts, the fears, the relentless voice in my head telling me I was nothing more than a cliché. That she'd wake up one day and realize she deserved someone younger, someone who wasn't carrying so much baggage. She didn't try to cheer me up with empty words. She just listened, and when I finally ran out of things to say, she looked at me and said, "You're not less because you're older. You're more. More stories, more lessons, more of yourself to give. You think I don't see that?" Her words weren't dramatic, but they hit with a force I couldn't deny. For the first time, I realized how much of my self-worth was tangled in how others saw me. How much I had let their judgment dictate my happiness. But she had never cared about any of that. She saw me in ways I had forgotten to see myself. And slowly, I started to believe her. I stopped explaining myself to people who didn't matter. I stopped apologizing for being happy. Of course, the doubts never fully vanished. But they became quieter, easier to manage. Because every time they tried to take over, she was there, not to fight them for me, but to remind me that I could. Our bond grew stronger, not because we shouted it from the rooftops, but because we didn't need to. We existed in our own little rhythm, one that didn't require validation. It wasn't perfect. We had disagreements, frustrations, days when the age gap felt real. But none of that outweighed what we had built together. And somewhere along the way, the spell I had feared so much stopped feeling like a trap. It became my freedom. She hadn't bewitched me. She had shown me how to free myself. And for that, I would always be grateful. Time has a funny way of moving. At first, every moment with her felt like stolen time, something temporary, fragile, too good to last. But days turned into months, and what once felt impossible started to feel normal. The age gap never disappeared. It was always there, a quiet fact between us, but it stopped being the main character in our story. We learned to live with it, like a scar that's healed but still visible. There were moments when it showed, her endless energy, my slower pace, her dreams still unfolding while I was reflecting on mine. But instead of creating distance, it taught us to meet each other where we were. She challenged me to step out of my comfort zone, to stop hiding behind routines and excuses. And I, in my own way, offered her a kind of calm, a steady presence that balanced her whirlwind. Of course, there were hard days. Times when my health would remind us both that I wasn't 25 anymore. Times when her friends would raise eyebrows or make comments that stung more than I admitted. But every struggle, every moment of doubt, was met with honesty. No sugarcoating, no pretending it was all easy. And that made all the difference. She never promised forever, neither did I, but we promised to be real, to be present, and somehow, that was enough. I often found myself thinking back to that first meeting at the gallery. How she had seen through me with such ease. Back then, I thought she was the one under a spell, charmed by the idea of someone older, someone different. But I see now that it was me. I was the one who had been blind, stuck in a loop of who I thought I was supposed to be. She didn't make me young again. She made me okay with not needing to be. She didn't fix me. She just reminded me that I wasn't broken in the first place. I'm not going to lie and say the world stopped judging. It didn't. People always have opinions. But the difference is, I stopped listening. Because what mattered was what we had. Simple, honest, imperfect, but real. Every time I look at her, I see the woman who gave me back to myself. And every time she looks at me, I know she sees the man I had forgotten how to be. Sometimes, late at night, when the noise of the world fades, I realize how lucky I am. Not because I found someone younger, but because I found someone who saw me when I couldn't see myself. Age is just a number. A lazy excuse people use to avoid the real questions. The truth is, connection doesn't check birth certificates. It just happens. And when it does, it changes you in ways you never expect. I used to be scared of what people would say. Now, I'm more afraid of missing out on living my truth. Because if this journey has taught me anything, it's that life rarely gives you what you want, but if you're lucky, it gives you what you need. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you of a part of yourself you've been ignoring, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let them know they're not alone. And if you want more stories that go beyond the surface, that challenge what's normal, hit that subscribe button and stay with us. Because sometimes, the most unexpected connections are the ones that save us.